We're starting today with some major breaking news. Atesh partisans have just crippled Russia's rail logistics near Kupiansk.
That's right. The date is December 31st, 2025, and this is a huge development.
We have confirmation that the resistance movement, Atesh, carried out a sabotage operation deep inside Russia in Voronezh's railway district.
And they didn't just, blow up a random piece of track. They targeted a specific diesel locomotive.
A locomotive that was being used to haul military cargo, specifically supplies for the Russian forces fighting at Kupiansk.
Exactly. And the destruction of that one engine, it's had this incredible cascading effect. It's completely complicated the formation of military echelons.
And thrown the entire train schedule for weapons and equipment into chaos.
It creates a kind of operational shockwave. It's really quite brilliant.
Before we get into this, a quick reminder. Subscribe to Defense Reports. It's your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex.
And I'm already.
And in this deep dive by Defense Report, we're giving you a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense. And today we're going to cover the shadowy resistance force that is turning Russia's logistical backbone, its railways, into, its greatest liability.
We're going to be focusing on the critical Kupiansk front and showing you not just what was hit, but why the whole system is so incredibly fragile.
Okay, let's just jump right in. A strike in Voronezh, which is, hundreds of miles inside Russia, has this massive impact on the front line near Kupiansk. How? Why such a disproportionate effect?
Well, it all comes down to one thing. The strategic gravity of the target Russia is so desperate to seize. The Kupiansk-Vezlovye rail hub.
That hub is everything to them, isn't it?
It's fundamental, absolutely fundamental to their strategy in the East, and it's because they are so reliant on this rail-to-front logistics model.
Help us unpack that model a little. It almost sounds like they just drive the train right up to the trenches.
No, not quite, but it's close. Essentially, Russian military doctrine prioritizes fixed rail. You load thousands of tons of armor, ammo, personnel onto these massive trains, and you get them as close to the fight as possible.
Because the capacity is just so much higher than trucks.
It's not even comparable. It's faster, carries more bulk, and it's just way more efficient for feeding a giant war machine. And Kupiansk-Vezlovye is the critical choke point where all those trains have to pass to supply that sector.
So for a Russian planner, taking that hub is, it's non-negotiable.
It's a tantalizing prize, an irresistible one. It is one of the largest, most complex rail junctions in the whole Kharkiv region, and it's the nexus for lines coming from Veluki and crucially from Voronezh.
Where the sabotage just happened.
Precisely. If you can't control that hub, your forward forces will starve no matter how many shells you have stockpiled 1,000 kilometers away.
And the strategic goal tied to this hub, it goes way beyond just the local fight, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The rail lines that radiate out from Kupiansk-Vezlovye, they point directly at Russia's bigger objectives. They feed into what we call the fortress belt cities of northwestern Donetsk. We're talking Sloviansk, Kramatorsk.
It's the key that unlocks the rest of the Donbas in a way.
It is. And that's why liberating this hub back in the fall of 2022 was such a key objective for the Ukrainian counteroffensive. The fight for that specific patch of railway is basically the story of the whole campaign in the Northeast.
Which brings us back to the group exploiting this very fragility. Let's talk about Atesh. Who are they? What kind of organization can hit a target so deep inside Russia?
Atesh is, you could call them an internal decay force. And their growth has been pretty remarkable. They were founded back in September 2022, starting as this clandestine movement of Ukrainians, Russians, and Crimean Tatars.
And they've evolved from that.
Massively. They've grown from these small scattered cells into a really coordinated, multi-layered network. And they're operating not just in occupied areas, but deep inside Russia itself.
They sound incredibly organized.
They are. They have a formal structure now with a few different arms. There's the Atesh Civil Force. They're the eyes and ears, gathering intel, finding targets. Then you got the combat wing for the actual sabotage.
And I saw they have a cyber unit now, too, Sabotage.
Yes, and that's becoming more and more vital. They focus on digital intelligence, finding out what's on a train manifest, locating an irreplaceable asset like that diesel locomotive.
So the cyber unit finds the target, and the combat wing takes it out.
It's a complete kill chain. The digital intelligence directly informs the physical action. It's incredibly precise.
And their insider advantage must be what gives them this unprecedented reach. How do they recruit in such a hostile environment?
Their strategy is very clever. They target residents of occupied territories, obviously, but also, and this is crucial, dissatisfied Russian servicemen.
So they're turning Russian soldiers.
Yes. By tapping into that internal dissent, they get agents with access codes, security clearances, and, detailed knowledge of military movements. They claimed they had something like 2,000 agents inside the Russian Armed Forces and National Guard.
2,000. I mean, that's not just resistance, that's deep penetration.
It really is, and it lets them avoid just random attacks and focus on these high-impact sabotage operations. They go after signaling equipment, which is paralyzing. They use arson, IEDs, but the goal is always systemic.
To cripple the logistics from within.
Exactly.
So this whole systematic campaign, it seems designed to just hammer on Russia's strategic Achilles heel. Let's go back to that Voronezh hit to really understand the leverage they have.
Right. The strike on the Voronezh-Lysky hub on December 31st, that hub is a major node for the entire Western grouping of forces. It shows their leverage perfectly. One destroyed locomotive creates this huge nonlinear effect.
Because you can fix a railway track pretty quickly.
The Russian railway troops, the RZHD, are very good at that. They can fix track in hours. But replacing a specific, powerful military-grade diesel locomotive needed to pull those heavy echelons, that is not something you can do quickly.
So even if the track is fixed in, say, 12 hours, if the train itself can't move, the supply flow to the Kupiansk group is still zero.
For an indefinite period. Exactly. The vulnerability shifts from the track to the specialized rolling stock. And this is clearly part of a calculated pattern of attacks.
Can you give us some other examples to see the bigger picture?
Sure. Look at December 21st, just 10 days before Voronezh. Atesh claimed sabotage at a key junction in Bataysk, down the Rostov region. They targeted the relay cabinets.
The signaling system, so the brains of the operation.
The central nervous system that controls all the traffic. And that hit disrupted the main supply artery for the entire southern front. Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, even Crimea.
That's far more paralyzing than just track damage, isn't it? It requires specialists, parts.
It's a much harder fix. And then you go back to November, you had partisans sabotaging tracks near Simferopol in Crimea. That was aimed directly at disrupting supplies for forces in the south. What's fascinating is how Russia's greatest strength, its reliance on fixed rail, has become its most exploitable weakness.
It's a rigidity that makes the whole system predictable. And you have to wonder, why aren't they dedicating more troops to defending these lines deep in the rear?
Oh, they're being forced to. But the network is so decentralized, they're just playing whack-a-mole across thousands of kilometers of track. So even though the RZHD is great at repairs, the sheer sustained systematic nature of these strikes,
Hitting an engine one day, a signaling cabinet the next.
it forces the entire supply chain into a state of what military theorists call logistical culmination.
Logistical culmination. What does that actually mean for the soldier at the end of that chain, the one waiting for ammo near Kupiansk?
It means the supply system can no longer sustain the offensive. It means they're spending all their energy fixing yesterday's problem, only for a new one to pop up somewhere else that was supposed to be safe. They lose all initiative.
So instead of pushing supplies forward to attack, they're pulling resources back just to defend the supply lines themselves.
Which makes that forward push impossible to maintain.
And this logistical chokehold seems to coincide almost perfectly with some major tactical shifts on the Kupiansk front in late 2025.
The connection is just undeniable. We saw Russia's top leadership, Gerasimov, Putin repeatedly claiming in November that Kupiansk had been seized.
Which was, we now know, part of a cognitive warfare push, right? To pressure the West.
Absolutely. But it was based on completely false reporting making its way up the chain of command. Even Russian mill bloggers were confused, saying there was no evidence the town had actually been taken.
And crucially, the Ukrainians still held the rail hub.
They still held Kupiansk-Vyzlovye. So while the Kremlin was celebrating this phantom victory, the reality on the ground was very different.
What was that reality for the Ukrainian forces who were operating against these starved logistical lines?
The reality was success. They conducted a series of very effective counterattacks through mid-December. They liberated areas in northern Kupiansk, like Kindrashivka and Radkivka, and they actually broke through to the Oskol River.
Which would cut the main Russian ground lines of communication, the GLOCs, into that area. That's a huge tactical win.
It is. The logistical failure in the rear had immediate consequences at the front. Even the pro-Russian mole bloggers had to admit the situation was getting bad. They said the situation for Russian forces on the right bank of the Oskol was becoming hopeless.
And that raises such an important question about morale. How does this kind of systemic failure affect the troops themselves?
The effect is just devastating. And we have reports from Atesh agents that detail something incredibly corrosive to trust within the ranks.
What's that?
In high attrition sectors like Pokrovsk and probably near Kupiansk too, the Russian command has been registering dead soldiers, not as killed in action, but as deserters, unauthorized absence.
Wait, hold on. They're marking their own fallen soldiers as deserters. Why? What's the incentive?
There are two, and they're both pretty horrific. First, it artificially lowers the official casualty numbers so they can keep reporting success up the chain. Second, and maybe more cynically, it allows the command to avoid paying compensation to the families.
So you're sent into a fight with no supplies, you die, and then the state officially erases your sacrifice and denies your family compensation by calling you a deserter.
It's the ultimate betrayal. It destroys the contract between the soldier and the state. You can see how that would create a profound internal decay, both psychologically and physically.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, it's so important to contrast this decay in the Russian system with the challenges Ukraine is facing. They're also under intense logistical pressure.
They are, and that contrast in resilience is probably the biggest strategic story of late 2025. Russia massively intensified its air campaign against Ukraine's railway operator, Ukrzalizia. They recorded over 1,100 strikes.
1,100 strikes in 1 year. That's nearly as many as the previous 2 years combined. What were they hitting?
Everything. Bridges, dispatch towers, electrical substations, maintenance depots. The damage was in the billions of dollars. It was a campaign designed to completely halt Ukrainian movement.
And doctrinally, that level of intensity should have crippled them, but it didn't. How did the Ukrainian system maintain its function?
Through adaptability, they prioritize rapid restoration and redundancy. Unlike the Russian system that depends on these secure, centralized hubs, the Ukrainian system is designed to decentralize and repair on the fly.
So they can absorb the hits and keep moving.
Exactly. Despite those 1,100 strikes, Ukrzaliznytsia kept moving over 60% of all goods and the huge majority of military supplies. It's a remarkable feat of resilience.
So on one side, you have this rigid Russian system that's folding under decentralized low-tech attacks in its supposedly safe rear. And on the other, you have a Ukrainian system that absorbs massive high-tech airstrikes and just keeps going.
It really highlights that the core strength in modern warfare isn't just about the weapons you have. It's about the resilience of the system that delivers them. And the Russian model is proving to be structurally brittle.
The disruption of that Voronezh-Kupiansk artery really proves that the deep rear is no longer a sanctuary for Russia. The partisan operative is proving to be just as lethal to an offensive as a frontline battalion.
It systematically chokes their momentum. It forces this logistical culmination and makes sustained operations, like the one against Kupiansk, nearly impossible.
The question for Russia now isn't just how to repair the damage. It's how can they possibly secure their own logistics when the threat is already inside the wire.
And that erosion of trust, the need to defend thousands of miles of track, that has to severely impact their ability to rotate forces and sustain these high-attrition fights going into the new year.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's 8. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.